There were many moments where I thought we were going to lose everything. Regardless of the circumstances of your birth, this technology does not discriminate.
Nicolas Cary, the visionary.
Behind the $14 billion blockchain.com revolution.
From revolutionizing digital payments to shaping the future of decentralized finance.
I remember we had built the first iOS app of a crypto wallet ever. I started a website building company when I was 16, 17, sold websites to all my friends' parents. Nothing worth doing is worth doing alone. And we're capable when we collaborate, when we share ideas, and we interrogate those ideas. I'm very grateful to be invited into this special space that you guys are curating here. I've gotten the privilege to visit communities all around the world, but it's rare that I can honestly say that there's something special happening and I can feel it in this room tonight. So you guys are, on this incredible perch up here above one of the greatest cities in the world. And I think you talked a little bit about, how you can see all this infrastructure and these cranes and people building and impacting the world. I think one of the duties we have as humans is to try and just leave this place a little bit better than we found it. And that's what I try and do with my work. It's a journey. I didn't wake up born that way necessarily. I think your responsibility envelope grows as your aperture to the world increases. And with that, you have hopefully a duty of care. And my general way of thinking about building businesses is really not that dissimilar from the way doctors think about treating patients, which is you generally need to approach it from a do no harm principle and add value and do something that's mutually beneficial. And I think when you start with those foundational things, then you can do some really incredible things in the world. So that's sort of an introductory maybe statement to what I hope we can talk a little bit more about tonight. But thank you very much to everyone, and obviously the Tell Us in One Club. And nothing worth doing is worth doing alone. And we are all more capable when we collaborate, when we share ideas, and we interrogate those ideas. And there are a lot of big problems in the world. That's not a secret to anybody here. But it also means that with a diligent application of effort, those are really big opportunities to solve for. And so I'm excited to hear and learn from many of you after. Hopefully we have our quick chat, and looking forward to finding ways that we can impact the world together positively.
We live in a parallel dimension. There's a parallel financial system that runs alongside what we know. I discovered that when I had a trip to China. I was asked by the Department of International Trade to help British brands enter big markets like China before Brexit. I was stationed in Liaoning province, which is the northern province of China, in a capital called Shenyang. And my colleagues in Shanghai said, you know what, Shenyang's about 10 years behind Shanghai. So I was expecting something quite primitive. I remember working there and I wanted to find something familiar. I found a Starbucks. There's a Starbucks everywhere in China. I ordered my usual decaf flat white. So if anyone wants to buy me coffee, you know my order. And as I reached for my wallet and took out my credit card and I looked at the face of the 16-year-old Chinese barista, he looked at me in shock. He was like, what is that? I'm like, it's a credit card, I want to pay. And he's like, what do I do with that? And I thought, oh my God, that's why they was telling me this place is so behind. They don't even know what a credit card is. I'm like, oh my God, it's a credit card. I do Visa and MasterCard. Get me your manager. So the manager comes along and goes, what seems to be the problem? I'm like, I want to pay with my credit card. I could literally see him. We've got another one. And, and he says, and he speaks to the boy and he goes, this is a credit card. Your dad used to use this 10 years ago. And the boy's face just like lit up. And suddenly I was surrounded by the staff wanting to take a selfie with me, holding my credit card up, because everyone uses WeChat Pay. Yeah. Digital wallet. And they thought, oh my God, it's so cute, he's got a credit card. And there's me like hiding my number. I don't want to. And they're like, oh my God, he's so cute, he's hiding his number. Digital wallets is what 1 point something billion people use. Right. More people use digital wallets on their mobile phones or devices than credit cards in the world. I do think credit cards are on their way out. Because of technology like blockchain, more people are investors. Because of crypto, more people have collected art, more of your art collectors, because of NFTs. But we call them digital assets now, don't call them NFTs. More money is moving around in terms of remittances, and that's something we talked about from Africa, because of a killer app like stablecoins. Over 100 central banks around the world are launching their digital version of their native currency, central bank digital currencies. Blockchain underpins all that. I feel, oh my God, blockchain has arrived. Even I got involved with a blockchain company looking at decarbonizing Bitcoin, tokenizing carbon credits, all very exciting. 2 years ago, I felt I was it. I didn't own blockchain.com. and of course, if you own blockchain.com, you're going to make 14 billion out of it. But this guy thought of it 2011. And so today is not going to be me asking questions about what's the single most thing you should, top tip for an entrepreneur. Yeah, you can ask him that afterwards. For me, right, and I'm being selfish here as an entrepreneur, I'm going to ask my questions. For me, I want to ask you, take us back to that moment, 2011, November 2011, the ideas, the feeling. Did you predict this would happen? The price of Bitcoin at that time versus the price of Bitcoin now. The team around you. Can you give us a sense of that ambiance, that atmosphere around that buzz? What did that feel like?
Okay. It'll be a little trip down memory lane. So in the beginning, we started the company October 15th, 2011, but it wasn't just me. There was a team. There were three sort of original founders of the founding group, and the first one was a young entrepreneur, and he was from York in Northern England. And to describe some of the atmospherics at this time, this was just, basically before 2012, prior to the Olympics, there's sort of a momentum occurring in the UK. And for those of you that may have been here, may remember some of the feelings, but it was broadly optimistic. You had a multicultural city, you had talent and investment, and I would say optimism about the future and tech especially. There were a lot of forums and people talking about all this stuff. And we were also just sort of, as young adults, I was 29 at the time, we were just emerging out of a very significant historical event, which was the Great Financial Crisis. And people that work in finance in the city, in those impressive buildings across our vista here, if they've worked in finance for the past 30 or 40 years, they'll talk about one or two incidents in their careers where everything was on the line, where there were grave, conditions and geopolitical challenges or volatility, and it was very scary. And the Great Financial Crisis was definitely one of those moments. In that moment, there was basically a reaction to it. And it's not too surprising to me that in a very complex system like the world economy, that when something really bad happens, it creates a lot of, I would say, questions about that thing. And one of them was that, well, maybe our great financial system isn't as resilient or maybe as efficient or modern or updated as it could be. And in this era of globalization, this era of technological development, what if we could invent a better form of a financial system, maybe a better form of money? And in that environment, people started sort of inserting ideas into it. And it took a great crisis for that to happen. And just like if there's in a natural system, when there's a forest fire, it allows for new growth, this was sort of something similar to that. And so some very early cryptographers that had worked on decades of other people's work and mathematicians from around the world basically wrote a white paper, which was the original Bitcoin white paper. And it is worth downloading, reading that. It's 12 pages long. It's not overly complicated to read, even if you're not a computer scientist. And it proposes a very novel system for keeping track of records on the internet. And it proposes a novel currency to enable basically recording those transactions into a big record-keeping system. And this thing was proposed, and we learned about it just a few years later. So I can't even claim to have been even in the very first vintage of adopters of digital currency or cryptocurrency technologies. The word blockchain doesn't even come into an existence until 2010. And so there was an internet forum called bitcointalk.org where people would meet kind of in secret on the internet, not dissimilar from a safe space where people felt like they could share ideas, interrogate things. And it was in this forum that the very first sort of projects and proposals for commercializing this concept sort of came into fruition. And that was where we got the idea for building the very first project that we created, which was something called blockchain.info. So I don't know if anyone ever heard of that, but that was the predecessor to blockchain.com. And the one thing the three founders had in common was a mutual interest in statistics. We were very nerdy. And we wanted to build a website that basically looked at all the transactional data and became a way of searching what was happening on the blockchain. And someone said, hey, you should just call it blockchain. And we're like, hey, that's a good idea. We don't know anything about branding. We'll just buy that domain. And that was a good idea. but I can't even take credit for that. Listening to customers is one of the few lessons I could really hope to convey to people, is that your customers are your best teachers. And early on in founding a company, you have a duty to listen very carefully so that you can help solve their problems. Our customers were a whole bunch of other internet dorks and nerds trying to learn more about this technology and wanting to understand whether or not there was any economic activity happening on the original Bitcoin protocol. So we built a website to basically do that. And what we learned very quickly is that there was a very early nascent but burgeoning group of adopters. And these were internet nerds. They were also called worse things. At the time, what we were doing was definitely not obvious that it would become wildly successful or create an entire alternative financial system or inspire incredible other entrepreneurs to build, wildly impressive businesses. But what was clear is that there was now a foundational change in a technological capability to do something that wasn't possible before. And it did take some, I would say, early adopters to step into that opportunity, which was not obvious and required a significant amount of vulnerability. I had a great career before that. I worked in a tech startup in Seattle. And when I took the job by moving from the United States to the middle of nowhere in the UK, which I thought at the middle of time New York was the middle of nowhere, we were outnumbered by sheep up there significantly. It was told it was career suicide, that it would never work, that this thing was only used by people buying drugs on the internet, or that it would facilitate terrorist financing, or that people were using it to facilitate purchases of illicit things on the web. And when you hear people you respect say those types of things about a personal decision you've made, it's very vexing, especially when you have a lot of optimism for the potential opportunity for it. But another thing you'll potentially learn early on as an entrepreneur is that sometimes you do kind of need to ignore everybody. And there are consequences to that. You may end up on a different part of the world. You may be far away from your family. You may be far away from the community that you had helped forge in one instance of your life. But sometimes those types of things are necessary. Now, this isn't everybody's story. This was just my story in founding this company. But in that environment in 2011, there was almost nobody working in this space yet. And if you look at the companies that exist today, we are the oldest established firm in the digital assets or cryptocurrency or blockchain industry today. And there have been many companies, and there have been many that have come and quickly, seemingly been successful to only have catastrophic failures. And building for the long term is also a really big challenge, especially for tech entrepreneurs. It can seem like the life cycle for your idea may be short, that there's going to be a lot of competition. And it just, when we'll get into something I think a lot of entrepreneurs talk a lot about, which is like, how do you develop your resiliency through market changes and pivoting your businesses and things like that. It is not easy. There were many moments where I thought we were going to lose everything. In 2013, I'll give one quick example, because it's more important that you interrogate my random thoughts. But I remember we had built the first iOS app of a crypto wallet ever. And Apple began systematically kicking out crypto wallets from the App Store. They were censoring us. And if your main distribution channel is Apple or Google, and they say, we don't like the thing you've built, you're not allowed in our store, you're screwed. You can't operate. And we had done something a little cheeky, which was we had geofenced Cupertino from being able to access the app. And so Apple didn't know that our wallet was still in their store for quite a while, which let us sort of operate quietly in their own backyard until at one point they did discover it, and then we were the last app to be removed in 2014 in January. And I remember it because it was one of those days where we were like, well, we might have just lost everything. And I got on the phone and I called every single reporter on earth that I could get a hold of, and I said, Apple is violating their prime directive. They were supposed to be the company that was punk. They were supposed to be the company that said, think different, empower individuals, go be creative, change the world. And here they are telling me what I can and can't do. And it was a dangerous move to go attack Apple. Apple is and continues to be one of those powerful companies in the world with an extraordinary lobbying army, with deep connections into the intelligence state, with everything you could imagine from a David versus Goliath type of situation. But it also really sort of created this moment that allowed the world to see that, like, hey, maybe some of our big institutions are not as benevolent as we thought they were. And what does that mean? And so it actually became this big rallying cry within the crypto community early on, which was like, hey, the establishment is trying to kill us. Like, maybe we're actually onto something. If this thing is so dangerous to them, like, you know, maybe there's actually something valuable here. And that became a further well of inspiration for me and my team, even though it was a precarious moment for the business.
I want to dig a little bit deeper. I really love that story of being able to go against the giants at the time. But for me, I wanted to understand what made you become that, to be able to solve those problems and have that level of conviction to take it all the way. I would have given up by then if Apple said.
I'm not sure about that about you, but
if you dig, but digging deeper, why care?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we're all a collection of our experiences, and we're shaped by things that happen sometimes in very early childhood to more formidable times in our adolescence and maturity. I had an international upbringing. My father was a teacher in South America. My mother was a civil servant. They divorced when I was 7. Money was definitely a big challenge in my household. My mom had to basically earn all the income for us, and I always saw that as like I wanted more money basically to help my mom, to help our family, and that became a major motivator for me. So I was obsessed with collecting coins, counting them.
That's interesting.
From pretty young age. And one of the first questions I like asking people to break ice is always, how did you earn your first pound, your first euro, your first dollar? And the stories are amazing. People became they babysitters, or they sold candy on the schoolyard, or traded baseball cards, or whatever it is. And we all actually start off as entrepreneurs. But then things tend to go either one way or another. Your parents tell you, oh, you got to be a lawyer, doctor, or something else.
Follow the program.
Or or whatever the pressures of the day are, and people choose different paths. But it was in this context that I became interested in building small businesses. I started a website building company when I was 16, 17, sold websites to all my friends' parents, and then I became a teacher in India for a while. I taught computer science and creative writing. Then I came back to the US and was this first employee in a tech startup called Pipeline CRM, which tried to compete with Salesforce, and Salesforce crushed us. And we built a great little company, though. We had 32 employees, and that experience was hugely formidable to me because that company was a small software as a service business, and our value proposition was to go to other companies and say, hey, you probably need help with growing your business and your sales. We can help with that. Teach me everything you can about your company and how you build it, and we'll build software that helps you basically run your sales funnel. And so as a 21-year-old, I got to learn thousands of different business models from the CEOs and owners of these companies telling me their most intimate problems about how they sell. And that was so valuable to me. And so getting that experience from the time I was 21 to 29 was just, I would really credit that, and a few personal mentors of mine along the way that helped keep me honest through the body of work. But that was really, really important. And
what single most value system that you derived from that would you kind of peg on?
A few things. So this will come down to the conditions that are required for me to be able to participate in a project or an initiative of some kind. So I understood myself pretty well probably around the time I was 18 years old. There are two things I kind of need in my life in order to be all in. I need to feel like I'm learning a lot, and I need to feel like I'm influential in that work. And if I have those two things, then those levers let me go the distance. And so what's amazing about the work I'm in now is that I feel like I have a very high degree of learning happening all the time. But as the organization's gotten bigger and more complex, my influence over it has changed a lot, especially over the last 12 years. And if you're successful, you may find that these things happen to you too. You used to have to be able to make all the decisions, but then things get more complicated, and you have groups, and there's committees, and then there's regulators, and then there's investors, and then there's the public, and then there's PR, and then it gets harder and harder to influence things over time. But I basically need the mixture of those two things to be over 50%.
You make it sound easy, actually.
I don't know if it is.
Actually, our CEO at Bridge in One Club, he always reminds us that resilience is a muscle that needs to be exercised.
Yeah.
What advice would you give us to exercise the kind of resilience that you've gone through?
Yeah. I think this is, I agree with that. Look, I mean, you guys are all on the hard path. If you're choosing to build your own company or work in an early stage business, or you've got a social enterprise or a charity that you're hoping to impact the world with. So it is not going to be easy. There are a few things you can do, in my view, from my experience, that will help you. One is cultivate a community. So what you guys are doing here, that's foundational. Having a tribe, people that you can talk to honestly about your challenges, your vulnerabilities, that's very important. I have an incredible tribe of friends, and they've come with me from the last 10 years quite remotely through this journey, but before that, very much in proximity. And so I think that's one aspect of it. Resiliency requires managed stress. You're going to get a lot of stress from work, but there are ways of escalating how much stress you sort of expose yourself to. And this is hard. You can trip up on this. So I would say that when I was in my 20s, I had a huge capacity for pain. And I was very open to also being criticized and told I was wrong. And I think a lot of that probably had partially to do with not having a significant father figure in my life. So like I was seeking this like, who's gonna tell me what to do? And like, I'm down, like tell me what to go do it, put me in coach, I'll run. And so that helped. And then, I don't know, that's what worked for me a bit. It's finding in mentors or advisors, I think is an aspect of that that can be very helpful. Not everyone needs those, and not everyone has good relationships with mentors and advisors. Sometimes they can be sanctimonious or condescending, and you have to find someone that isn't going to necessarily actually tell you what to do, but will draw out from you your own way of doing it so that you're responding naturally to the difficulties and adversities that you face. And then I have to plug health here because I was very shitty at this. I had sleeping problems. I had lots of anxiety. Lots of challenges with mental health throughout my career. And I think that's not that uncommon among entrepreneurs in general. But basically, like my pattern was always like very volatile. Like my highs were huge and my disappointments were severe. And a lot of older people, I think, are constantly actually trying to impose some wisdom down on us, but we're frequently not ready to hear it. Just like when you're 14 or 15, you don't want your parents telling you got to be home at 10. And when you're 21, you don't want your parents telling you got to pay off your credit card. And when you're 30, you don't want your parents telling you got to start taking your health care seriously. But they are trying to help because there's some old wisdom in those things. And if you don't want to have an EKG of your heart doing that your whole life, you need to mend your cycles and basically start to move it more into a softer pattern. And so this is a long way of saying there are times in your life where you really do need to probably sprint, work really hard, stay up late, grind it out. Your youth will be an advantage in those early stages. Later, you have to think about more about how you wind, I would say, like again, smooth out that sort of stress curve. And things like exercise, healthy eating, not drinking too much. There's some things in there that will give you not superpowers, but advantages. And
it's assuring to me to know that you're human. It feels that
I'm definitely flawed.
But
human.
Something that I think we probably all go through as entrepreneurs or human beings actually is, are we enough?
Yeah.
We keep beating ourselves up on, I'm not good enough for this, that, the other. Nick, are you enough?
Oh God, I hope I earned that at some point. But I'm not sure you
made
decide
it.
that.
You feel like, I made it. Does that exist ever?
Oh, I am, when I wake up some days, I'm like, God, I have so much bullshit to deal with today. How am I going to deal with that? But then I'm like, you know what, life's okay. I am very fortunate. I have an amazing wife. I have great friends. Today I'm healthy. And you have to find, starting from a position of gratitude for being here on this planet. And trust me, we live in, even though the world seems dangerous and complicated and stressful and all those things, we'd probably rather be alive in this moment than in any other point in human history. And so I think if we can take that breath and start from that position each day and get out of bed, be excited to be, to have the opportunity to go pursue whatever you're doing, because there's some person in a hospital right now that's on their back that would trade fucking everything to be in your shoes today. And you owe it to them. And so reminding ourselves of that, while not always the most pleasant thing, is one way I kind of get myself out of bed even when I don't feel like doing it.
Excellent. We're going to go to questions because I want to share this with everyone. Last question from me. You've successfully raised for different companies. Investors are human, even though we probably don't think they are as entrepreneurs. How do we connect with how have you been able to connect with investors for them to be able to believe in what you're doing? Any tips for us? How can we see the human in them or bring the human out of them for them to be
it's
part
a great
of our
question.
tribe?
My perspective on this, look, we've raised over $1 billion, which sounds like an absurd amount of money. I've never sold a share of the business. That money doesn't come to line my pockets. It goes to help us build a resilient international global operation, and that's why you're raising money. Now, I would advise founders at different stages of their entrepreneurial journey to take care of themselves economically as well. You being stressed out about money isn't necessarily going to help you execute your business effectively. There's some amount of stress that's appropriate, but not all of it. When it comes to raising capital, there's a good book I recommend called Venture Deals by Brad Feld. You should read it. You should be familiar with all the vocabulary in the book so that you can parlay and you can dance with venture capitalists. And I think that contribution by Brad is pretty good. He's a venture capitalist himself, and he's like, this is our playbook. These are the words and terms you need to understand. Here are the different ways you can structure all kinds of different deals, and take it or leave it. But this is how we approach negotiating with you. I used to be really intimidated by investors because I also saw them probably when I was 21 to 29 as these luminaries of knowledge, and they were so clever. These guys are gamblers, and they are gambling mostly with other people's money. And they are really hoping that one of the 100 things that they place a bet on takes off to 10,000%. And with that, they have a portfolio returning investment, and they don't give a shit about the rest of it. Not everybody is this way, but that is the business model of most venture funds. There are nicer venture funds, and then there are partners within those venture funds that can be really helpful if they have a personal life experience, if you connect with them. It's relationship building, and it's hard to go on one date with someone and immediately know that you want to spend the rest of your life with that person. You should think of your work to develop connectivity to investors and venture capitalists similarly. Your situation and your negotiation position will be vastly improved by having product market fit, revenues, testimonials. Don't be overly concentrated just on the technology side of things. I mentioned earlier the importance of selling. And too many founders, they're too obsessed with the creativity. And it's fun, obviously, to redesign the website and think about how you'll do growth marketing. And of course, we all want money. But what you might need is real validation that you're solving an actual problem that people are willing to pay you for. And if you bring that piece of it, then it actually gets easier and more fun to do that other stuff when you've gotten an actual business model that's sustainable, and then you can scale it with external funding. But I wouldn't necessarily advise that you pursue venture funding. It really depends on your goals. What kind of company do you want to build? What type of problem are you solving? If you want to build a nuclear reactor, you're going to need a shitload of money. If you want to solve a problem in your community, you may need a different composition of support, and it can come in a lot of different ways. There are consequences to raising money from external investors. They may have control provisions over your business. They may really have a stranglehold over how and what you can do when you can sell, what markets you can enter, how much money you can spend on different initiatives, so you will lose control and agency over something you have more knowledge of than they ever will. And so it's just something to be aware of. Obviously, you get asked all the time, like, how do I raise money, or what, all these questions, and it always just like pump the brakes a little bit. Like, what are the goals? What kind of business are you really trying to set up? Because it changes the answer to the question. But
no, thank you for that.
I'll add one more thing to that, which is you need to have a mentality of outlasting your venture capitalists. And that partially is the resiliency aspect of it. But like for those of you that build businesses that rely on B2B partnerships or other relationships, you will be disappointed in your careers. You will work so hard to close a deal only to find out that the counterparty, the person that was your relationship manager, leaves the company at the minute before you're about to sign the biggest deal of your life. And then you are starting all over again. And this can happen with a partner at a venture fund where the person you did establish that great rapport with retires, or they take a paternity leave, or they have an internal fight because these places are savage, vicious, corporate, capitalist entities, and they are killing each other to be on top of the stack of their own preferences within their organizations. It can be a very frustrating interaction. And so I caution overinvestment in these things as well, because at the end of the day, you want to keep it professional, but protect yourself as much as you can.
You've given us so much insight. And I wanted to ask, final question before we open it to everyone. Future, any trends that you can see in the next 5 years that you think are going to change the landscape for investment, or people building out their entrepreneurial journey and their tech? Any trends you see? I have a feeling things are moving east.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the world's moving southeast and potentially into still America. I've been living here for 10 years. I married a British woman. I'm all in, okay? But it's hard to underestimate the extraordinary space and the wealth that the United States still has as a market. If you were playing poker and you were played a set of cards, America got given the best cards on earth. They have a huge amount of natural resources. They have a huge amount of land. They have fresh water. They have food security. They have physical security. They're a new country. They have enough land to give every single person 50 square acres and have plenty left over. And so there's a lot of expansion still to happen there. Its big vulnerabilities are probably internal crisis and political conflicts, and who knows whether or not it can survive all of that because it is so fresh and new. But I think big markets, without a doubt, are the global south. I think India is extremely interesting. It has a growing democracy and demographic. So does Brazil. I don't want to be a downer about the UK, but I think if you're going to be honest about it, this is a shrinking market in some ways. Regardless of our positions on the history of political decisions here, we haven't navigated expanding the market access for founders here that well over the last few years. And I'm hopeful that with every political change, there's an opportunity to revisit how those things are happening. But I talk to a lot of young founders in the UK, and they are looking to solve problems in those other markets because the opportunities are bigger. It's not to say there aren't ways of making a lot of money in the UK. I think there are. But
does British tech still have that allure that it's got integrity, it's got trust? If you're going out to Dubai with a
definitely.
British tech,
yeah.
do we still have that? Have we lost it?
No, you have it. And there's a few huge advantages the UK has. Look, language. When I speak to people in this country, I am sometimes just like in awe of the breadth of vocabulary and the nuance and how you can layer conversations. But these are actually really important. They're almost the foundations of how we develop computer software code. And this is a huge advantage, by the way. Every computer language in the world is based on English syntax. That gives anyone working in the tech space a crazy advantage. You don't have to learn another language just to be able to write, computer software. And so, yeah, I think other things that make the UK a great place to build and found companies, the rule of law, the English language, the access to capital, regulators, and a global talent pool here make the UK quite special. I don't want to be too negative about it, but it is a big, wide world, and depending on what fish tank you want to play in, sometimes it's too good to go experiment and try other things. But I mean, it really depends on the business, and don't want to prescribe too much on that.
But Kiki, I wanted to ask.
Because even
I want to ask a
when we're
question.
speaking about these foundational technologies, of course, blockchain is built upon cryptography, as you said. Cryptography was something that came out of Bletchley Park.
That's right.
Even from the radio to the telephone, you see so many foundational kind of technologies being built in the UK. But I think our ability to actually take those to market and apply them and actually connect it to the real value and the real proposition, right? Connecting with the customers directly is something that we've seemed to historically struggle with, really. I think it's the reason why, a lot of the most talented, entrepreneurs from both the UK and Ireland, I think of the Stripe brothers, they left.
Yeah.
Right? I think of a lot of the other kind of foundational companies, they've left. I think we have to be biased on that point. We're based here, right? A lot of what we're thinking about is how do we put that community together that ties all of those aspects of the chain so that doesn't have to happen, at least not to the extent that it does. What do you think are the most foundational kind of pieces to tie that string back together?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and it's a difficult one to answer because I'm not sure I have all the answers. You may have better answers to that question than I do. I'll just say that I think it's so important that we make this the greatest place in this hemisphere to build, found, and create companies and wealth and support entrepreneurs. If you want to build and grow the economic base of the UK, we need a lot more entrepreneurs that look like the composition of the UK's economy, and they need to be across the country. And it needs to be easier to build companies. It needs to be more tolerable for them to fail. It needs to be, I'm a big proponent of deregulating here. If any of you work in food and health or safety or pharmaceutical or anything else, it's insane. If you were to go and ask for permission to basically build any company here, it seems like you would just be told no at every step of the way. And so those things don't create an environment that's welcoming for innovation.
Even just on that point,
it's too much. We've created a bit of a society, from my view, that it's like, why bother? It's so bloody hard. Why would we do this? And yet we're here because we still care enough to
And that's
to
creating
go try it.
opportunities for other countries like
Totally.
Dubai to be more lax with their regulations, and then there's a mass exodus.
Yeah, there's a big
as a result.
arbitrage on all that stuff. I think the United States was a great place for a long time, but getting there is now difficult because they've closed the borders down meaningfully. So, you know, there's basically three ways to grow an economy, and you can, you know, develop incredible technological improvements. You can basically massively reduce the cost of energy, which is the most important input to an economy, or you can bring the world's greatest, best talent to come innovate and develop in your country, or enable that native intellectual capacity to basically flourish. And when you slap rules on it, when you make it so difficult that spirits the people that are most interested in improving their communities, you have adverse outcomes, and creates cultural differences between the country versus more competitive ones as aspirations between countries change and shift over time.
Fantastic.
And so that's a random
thank you very
political
much,
comment.
Nick.
But
Can we open it out to anyone who has questions for Nick? You're the first, so let's go. And then we'll go.
And then we'll do that.
Then yeah, let's do that. If you can stand up so we can see you.
Thank you so much for the great panel, and also for the life lessons on the founder journey. Just wanted to pick your brain on thoughts about when you're running so short of that seed capital, which we've all been through. What are your thoughts, strategies on that point of being bold enough to trade your way through the next space? What kind of impact does that have on investors and pitches? Just wanted to pick your brain on that.
You trade until you get it, I think. Staying alive is like #1 goal. And if you have to be, you know, on what I call like a skeleton crew, if it's just you, you got to persevere, because no one cares about your idea more than you do. And the investors that you've spoken to in the past, if they weren't ready, it wasn't a personal thing against you. It maybe have been the timing wasn't right, or they weren't really investing in the category. There are 2 huge venture funds in Silicon Valley, billion-dollar funds that have returned capital to their LPs in the last year. So the market is weird right now. I would search alternative sources of capital. If you have validation for your product from customers, maybe work to build a small fundraising within a customer group through Crowdcube or these alternative investment platforms. I think having customers as your advocates and investors is a really wise alignment. And then, you know, there are other programs, whether they're, you know, here in the UK, I don't know them as well, but in the US, there's Community Redevelopment Investment Acts. Basically, it's more affordable loans that come through like smaller regional banks. Yeah, and I mean, I could happily maybe investigate this a little bit more if I knew a bit more about your business. But don't give up. What I would also say is the
Stay alive.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lady at the back.
Hi. So next week is London Web3 Week. I don't know if anyone's aware of that. And so one of the questions that I know that's going to come up, and very much about education people, particularly women and diverse communities, to come into the blockchain space, is how do we change that narrative around blockchain equals crypto, therefore blockchain is bad?
Good question.
Rather than blockchain is a whole ecosystem that's continued to grow. And yes, it's kind of been, you know, how can I put it now, censored with regulation and compliance, which we know is important. But how do we promote blockchain in a way that people can understand that it's more than crypto and it is worth investing into, not just in money, but in time and effort?
Very good question.
Thank you for asking that question. So after 13 years of working in this space, I have dealt with meaningful amounts of antagonism toward our industry and toward the messages. And I've seen different playbooks thrown at the industry by large incumbents, by banks, by central banks, by regulators, by you know, large institutions that don't want to see change, don't want to see disruption, and have vested interests against you or against the organizations that operate in the industry. I don't think, like, there's different perspectives on how to deal with this. You know, there's some that would argue we should be more aggressive in attacking our adversaries. I think there's some foundational things about the work we do which are so fundamentally important, which is that regardless of the circumstances of your birth, this technology does not discriminate. It means that anyone that at least has access to the internet can start to interface with technologies that allow them to control and manage their data more securely and privately that grow and create wealth more securely and privately, to create markets with anyone, anywhere in the world more instantly, to facilitate the fluidity of money, which helps move economic velocity. And if you have more money flushing through the world economy, it builds a bigger pie for everybody. And so I think getting back to some of those things that were true 13 years ago that are still true today, sort of help remove some of the more nefariously stupid arguments around, well, Sam Bankman-Fried fucked the industry over or whatever it was. And like, it's true, there are bad actors in this industry, but there have been bad cab drivers and there have been bad people that operate in nearly every industry. And it is incumbent on us to call them out, ideally before there's meaningful consumer harm. You know, I think unfortunately, you know, when there's a very big attractive thing that's changing the world, it brings in really inspirational people to work on it, and it also brings in very greedy, very short-term thinking people, and they take advantage of that opportunity. And so it requires us to be better than that. When I opened up talking about that sort of like do no harm principle, but to me that's like, it's so key, because if you have that, you have moral mandate basically to operate.
Do you think that requires like highlighting those successes and those people who have stepped forward and kind of put it forward with that do no harm principle forward, and like making that known as something that actually underlies what they're doing? Because I think
I've struggled with this personally, because like I've had people be like, well, you got to be far more in front of this issue and advocate more strongly for financial inclusion, and these great arguments that I think are very true, and one of the reasons I still participate and I'm so motivated to make this my life's work. But I also think when you put yourself really in front of it all, you also attract the most amount of arrows to yourself. And there's an old phrase in the West of the United States, it's the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers get the land. And it does require probably some pioneers and some martyrs through this process, and there have been. There are people that are in prison today because they wrote software code. There are people that are behind bars because they exercise their free speech to write stuff that politicians and incumbents found to be dangerous to them. And unfortunately, you know, they've really sacrificed everything to, you know, to put us in a position to hopefully unwind that someday. But there's a generational thing happening, and I think everyone is, again, trying to talk earlier about like how we learn things as we get older. This is why spending time with young people is so important, because they're seeing the world differently, and they're fixing and mending some of the problems that we created as millennials, that were created by the boomers, that our grandparents left behind and caused, that have long-term impacts in our world. And the world is also going to retire them. They will transition to the next realm, and the next generation will transition forward too. And so I think there's certain lessons we got to get better at transmitting between our generations. But I don't know, I don't have great answers for these things. You know, old people seem to be clutching on to things a lot.
Do you have anyone else with a question? George at the back.
So thank you for the great panel, Nicholas. And I just have one question. So you said that you had peaks and then you had extreme lows. So I just wanted to ask, how did you handle the extreme lows and how did you get out of it, or what exactly did you do to actually handle yourself?
Nice question.
Because I think very you answered every other question that I wanted to ask.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a different prescription, I think, for everybody. For me personally, sharing some of that burden, but carefully with highly trusted people was important. But a lot of the time, you are really actually very much in control of how you react and respond to stressors and negativity in the world. And if you actually, there's a good deal of research on this, but if you frame everything constantly as a problem and surround yourself in the cloud of negativity, it'll impact your psychology, and it'll make you feel more vulnerable, more depressed constantly. And so there are techniques that you can adopt, and I would encourage a bit of study into it, but it's everything from diet to rest to sleep to positive thinking, to gratitude, to doing things for other people once in a while, not all the time, that just sort of make them feel better about themselves. And when you kind of put that, this is sort of like the karmic good thing, but it's not like there's not like one prescriptive thing to do. But and there are periods of time where it could be low for a while. And I don't want to say there's a magic bullet, because there really isn't. It's not like you can just take a pill and fix that stuff. But I think relying partially on communities that will also relate to your experience is going to be helpful. And so that's why founders are like, I would rather spend time with founders than pretty much any other categorization of person, because I share more in common with a founder of a small startup slash bodega in East London than I do with a management consultant at KPMG. Like, that person's life doesn't relate to mine whatsoever. But the person who's paying their payroll and stressing about their family and keeping inventory on the shelves, I get that problem.
Right.
So
thank you very much
like
for that
one,
question.
I mean, one low which is like less impactful, and then when you have the next one which is even harder.
yeah.
So I mean, you keep getting that in your journey. I'm sure. I mean, that's how it would have been.
Yeah.
You solve. So it's just a personal question, but it keeps happening. So.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we can catch up a little bit afterwards, but what I'll comment on is that, like, when you're a kid and you don't get what your parents want, maybe you didn't get what you wanted for your birthday or whatever, you're like, the worst day of your life, and you're like, okay, that's actually not a big deal. And then later in life, maybe you have a big breakup from someone, and that was the worst day or worst week, or maybe the worst month of your life. And then maybe further along, you start a company and things aren't going well, and you're running out of money, or you're not getting that seed investment, and it's the worst 6 months of your life. You'll have periods of time that are really good over a duration and then less good over time. And our actual understanding of what's good or not good is only defined by its opposite. And so just know that it won't be permanent and persevere through it. And there's a quote by Winston Churchill, which I love, and it's just that persistence of never, ever, ever, ever give up. And if you don't, then you'll be okay.
Excellent. We've got a room for just 2 more questions. George and Lavanya.
How do you feel about institutions such as BlackRock and Vanguard getting involved in the market?
I have a confession. Great question. I have a confession. My wife works at BlackRock.
Sore point.
We have a different perspective on all of this. Yeah, that's a whole other story. But look, it's honestly, it's difficult to come to sort of terms with, to a certain extent, because when we founded this whole thing, we really saw ourselves as, like, I won't say pirates, but like space pirates, really cool, in the spirit of, like, the rebellion in Star Wars, and like the guys going up against the big mean animals and the real entrenched establishment that has been sucking money out of everybody forever through a parasitic system that's corrupt and fucked. And it is. But, and this is where maybe it's like the spirit changes over 10 years of the combat, but like, we also need this transition of wealth to become digitized. And if BlackRock wants to sell a lot of crypto to a lot of boomers, I'm okay with it. Because at the end of the day, it sort of begins this longer, broader transition to, in my view, a world that we've been working on shaping. Will it be ideal? Not at all. And I honestly think there's some 16-year-old kid probably in South London imagining a system that operates with incentives that are far more fair and efficient and fluid than anything that's been imagined to date. And that person is able to do that because of all this other work that's happened. And at some point, I'll be wrong about all kinds of stuff as an old person, as I'm, clutching to the vestiges of a world that are changing too fast for me to comprehend anymore. And I honestly believe things are going to get extremely weird for us all over the next few decades. And so at some point, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of examples of this, but the older generations have to start passing power batons down a little bit earlier. And we're sort of seeing a little bit of that, I think, begin to emerge with younger leaders and some democracies being elected, which I think is encouraging, but not everywhere. So.
Excellent. And we had a final question from Lavanya.
Yes.
Thanks for a great panel. My question is, what are your lessons learned scaling blockchain from the year you started till now through volatility and different economic cycles? And how has your leadership style changed in accommodating such, operating in an environment like this?
Thank you. It's a good question. So I'll tell a brief anecdote, and then I'll try and deliver a few thoughts around the specific question around scaling. So I was the first CEO of blockchain.com. I'm no longer the CEO of blockchain.com. I passed the torch on to my co-founder a while ago. And I had personal reasons for doing that, which was I gave everything I could to the earliest initiative of taking it from a fledgling, precious, fragile thing to when we closed the largest round of financing in the UK's history. And after that, I was like, there's things I don't know how to do here. I was confident in my ability to partner with my co-founder to do that. Is it easy? Absolutely not. And I would say that there are very, very few people in the world that can do the entire arc of basically starting off as an individual contributor to becoming a manager, to becoming a leader and a CEO, and then transitioning into what's broadly understood as like a governance role. They're usually quite specialized. And so it's possible to do that. And I think one of the things that makes it possible is to have a wide, to be very open to learning a lot, because ultimately you're going to have to expose yourself to things you don't understand and know, and make yourself vulnerable and learn and educate about the different stages of where your business is. And so what made me a great CEO of the company from the very first bit was everything I had done in the previous 10 years working at that first startup. In future initiatives or work I do with my charitable organization, I have a completely new set of capabilities and skills thanks to what's happened since then that I'm able to deliver and bring to those organizations now. And so it's a weird answer, I guess, but I basically am saying that like you might have it in you to play at every level. And it's also part of like, what do you want out of it? Do you want to be the directly responsible individual for absolutely everything? Because that will come with a completely different level of stress and responsibility, and not everyone necessarily wants that. So you can distribute those things by thoughtfully building a team. And the last thing I'll say about this is, and this is not universal, but maybe it'll resonate, is that founding companies, the earliest stage, you need the people that are on the mission with you. They'll crush through walls, they'll hurt themselves if they need to, they'll get through anything with you, and you have a high degree of trust. So you want your missionaries with you at the beginning. Later, and then for lack of a better term, you probably start to specialize and hire more mercenaries, which is specialists, people that are experts in their domain fields, and that's where the combination of the composition of your organization may change a little bit. And the people that are really good at the early stage stuff may not be so good at operating with more structure, with more responsibility, with more accountability, and probably definitely not with an HR department. And I can tell you that with everyone we hired, we've had 1,500 people come through the company. There's one person that's been there 9 years now. Oh. And so, and I, as a very pack-oriented person, I like my team. I want everyone to get through the whole thing together. It's disheartening to transition people and lose talent and have them leave or go found their own companies. And it's not easy because we wanted everyone to participate in the whole thing. But the reality, now that I see it with more time, is that that's just people have energy to give to things that are not founders. Founders need to have long-term energy for things. But your teammates and employees and colleagues, get the best out of them that you can while they're there with you. And then it's okay when they need to head off in different directions.
Thank you, thank you. Nick, will you stay with us for 10, 15
yes.
minutes before, if anyone wants to speak?
Of course.
Excellent. And I just wanted to thank Telos House. I wanted to thank One Club. I wanted to thank our sponsors, Bridge. If the world was about to collapse, we needed to get on a spaceship to get out to Mars. We're all the enlightened ones who will be on that ship. Unfortunately, there is many that will not be on that ship. And I think the combination of the three entities have that fear that people will be left behind. And so we will provide them the tools and the know-how to be just like Nick.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the man, the myth, the legend, Nick.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much.
This was great.